If you are a Seventh-day Adventist, your entire theological identity is built on a very specific, exclusive claim. You have been taught that your denomination is the eschatological remnant of Revelation 12:17. A remnant identified by two unshakable markers: keeping the commandments of God and possessing the testimony of Jesus, which your church defines as the spirit of prophecy, manifested in the life and massive literary output of Ellen G. White. To validate this claim to the wider Christian world, Adventist apologists utilize four primary biblical tests of a prophet. First, absolute harmony with the Bible, Isaiah 8:20. Second, teaching the truth about Jesus Christ's incarnation, 1 John 4:1-3. Third, bearing Christ-like spiritual fruits, Matthew 7:16-20. And fourth, absolute predictive accuracy, Deuteronomy 18:22. Adventists are incredibly quick to use these exact biblical scales to demolish other modern religious movements. If a Mormon tries to defend Joseph Smith's prophecies, or a member of the Iglesia ni Cristo tries to defend Felix Manalo, Adventists will relentlessly tear their claims to pieces using the Bible. But here is the question they are terrified to answer. What happens when we take Ellen G. White off her pedestal and place her on the exact same scale? Does she actually survive her own church's scrutiny? Or are Seventh-day Adventists guilty of a massive, hypocritical double standard? Let's look at the facts. Let's begin with the first and most vital test, Isaiah 8:20. To the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. The entire structural framework of Seventh-day Adventism hinges on the investigative judgment, a highly complex doctrine constructed to explain why Jesus Christ did not return to earth on October 22, 1844, during the Great Disappointment. To salvage the movement, Sabbatarians claimed that Jesus didn't fail. He simply changed locations. Ellen White asserted in vision that on October 22, 1844, Jesus transitioned from the first apartment of the heavenly sanctuary, the holy place, into the second apartment, the most holy place, or Holy of Holies, to begin a secondary final phase of atonement and investigative judgment. But does this claim align with the Bible? The Epistle to the Hebrews explicitly states that, upon his ascension in the first century, Jesus entered directly within the veil, which in tabernacle language refers exclusively to the most holy place. Hebrews 6:19-20 states that Jesus entered within the veil at his ascension. Hebrews 9:24 confirms that Christ entered into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Furthermore, Matthew 27:51 records that the temple veil was torn in two at the moment of Christ's death, demonstrating that direct access to the immediate presence of God was established at the cross, not delayed until 1844. But the theological deviation runs even deeper. In the Great Controversy, Ellen White wrote that Christ entered the Holy of Holies in 1844 to make atonement and begin the blotting out of sins, claiming this was a work distinct from his sacrifice on the cross. Compare that directly with the plain words of Scripture. Hebrews 9:26 declares that Christ put away sin once by the sacrifice of himself. Hebrews 10:12-14 states that after Christ offered one sacrifice for sins forever, he sat down at the right hand of God, having perfected forever them that are sanctified. The Bible says the sacrifice and the atonement were completed once and for all at the cross. Ellen White says they were not, and that a secondary final atonement had to begin in 1844, but her early writings took this deviation to a terrifying extreme. In her early visions, she claimed that those who did not accept this 1844 transition were left in darkness, and that if they prayed to Jesus in the holy place, Satan would stand by the empty throne, breath an unholy influence upon them, and personally answer their prayers. Think about that. If you are a non-Adventist Christian praying to Jesus Christ, Ellen White's inspired vision claims you are actually praying to the devil. Is this in harmony with the New Testament, or is it a radical theological invention designed to protect a failed date? If you ask the Ellen G. White estate about her early years, they will tell you her visions were completely consistent and directly inspired by God. However, historical reconstruction reveals a highly calculated pattern of theological revisionism and the systematic editing of her early visions to hide a massive embarrassment. the shut-door doctrine. Immediately following the Great Disappointment, the early Sabbatarian pioneers, including Ellen Harmon, firmly believed that human probation had closed on October 22, 1844. They believed the door of salvation was shut and that no more sinners could be saved. In December 1844, Ellen received her first vision. In its original published format in the Day Star, she described the Advent believers traveling on a narrow path. She explicitly wrote that those who rejected the 1844 movement fell off the path, and it was just as impossible for them to get on the path again and go to the city as all the wicked world which God had rejected. By 1851, the Sabbatarians realized this was a catastrophic mistake. People were still being converted, and the church needed to launch global evangelism. The original shut-door visions had become a massive theological liability. So what did they do? They altered the inspired text. In the 1851 edition of her book, Experiences and Views, that entire phrase, "all the wicked world which God had rejected," was quietly deleted. But that wasn't the only deletion. Sabbatarians also completely cut out a long passage describing Ellen's detailed tour of the heavenly temple and the contents of the Ark of the Covenant in her 1844 vision. Why? Because in her original 1844 vision of the Ark, she only saw a golden pot of manna and Aaron's rod. She completely failed to see the Ten Commandments or the Sabbath. Sabbatarians only accepted the Sabbath in 1847. Once the Sabbath became their core doctrine, her original 1844 vision of an empty ark became highly embarrassing. It proved her inspired tour of heaven had missed the very foundation of Sabbatarian theology. So, in 1851, they simply deleted the scene to prevent anyone from asking questions. They even borrowed secular imagery to dress up her visions. Her descriptive tour of Mount Zion and the 7 mountains growing roses and lilies was lifted directly from the non-canonical book of 2nd Esdras 2:19. Her description of the gates of heaven swinging back on golden hinges was later edited to glittering hinges in 1851 to match the exact published words of another contemporary visionary, William Foy. If any other modern religious movement was caught retroactively editing divine visions to erase theological errors and borrowing from other writers, Seventh-day Adventists would immediately call them a fraud. Why is Ellen White granted a free pass for the exact same behavior? Let's move to the third biblical test: predictive accuracy. Deuteronomy 18:22 states that if a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord and the prediction does not happen, that is the thing which the Lord hath not spoken. Ellen G. White has multiple documented predictive failures. First, the 1856 translation vision. During a Sabbatarian conference in 1856, White declared, "I was shown the company present at the conference. Said the angel, 'Some food for worms, some subjects of the 7 last plagues, some will be alive and remain upon the earth to be translated at the coming of Jesus.'" Every single individual who attended that 1856 conference has been dead for over a century. The prediction failed in its plain, literal sense. Second, the Civil War prophecies. During the American Civil War, White prophesied that the Northern soldiers enlisting to destroy slavery were deceived. She wrote, "The object of this war is not to abolish slavery, but to preserve it." Historically, the war did successfully abolish slavery through the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment. She also predicted that England would declare war on the United States, leading to a global conflict. When England does declare war, all nations will have one interest of their own to serve, and there will be general war, general confusion. England never declared war, and the global conflict never happened. How does the Ellen G. White estate defend these clear failures? They appeal to conditional prophecy, citing Jeremiah 18:7-10, to argue that God's eschatological promises are contingent upon human faithfulness. But here is the crushing double standard. Mormon apologists use the exact same conditional prophecy defense to explain away the failed temporal predictions of Joseph Smith. When Joseph Smith's prophecies failed to materialize, Latter-day Saint apologists claimed that human unfaithfulness delayed the outcome. or that the predictions were spiritualized. Seventh-day Adventists rightly reject the Mormon defense as a desperate, unbiblical cop-out. Why is it a cheap excuse for Joseph Smith, but a brilliant theological defense for Ellen White? The same hermeneutical hypocrisy applies when Adventists evaluate Felix Manalo, the founder of the Iglesia ni Cristo. The Iglesia ni Cristo teaches that Manalo was the last messenger of God, and the angel from the east prophesied in Isaiah 41:9 and Revelation 7:2-3. The INC argues that the phrase "ends of the earth" in Isaiah 41:9 is a temporal epoch that began on July 27, 1914, the exact day World War I broke out and the date Manalo registered his church. Adventists rightly expose this as a massive hermeneutical blunder. They point out that in Hebrew, the phrase "katse haaretz," ends of the earth, is a geographic idiom meaning the farthest corners of the land, referring to Israel's exile, not a 20th century time period. Yet, look at what Ellen White did with the shut door parable of Matthew 25 and Daniel 8:14. When Jesus did not return in 1844, she retroactively stripped the shut door of its original meaning and converted it into a complex, multi-apartment sanctuary transition to save her historical timeline. Both Manalo and White did the exact same thing. They took a biblical concept, ignored its literal context, and retrofitted it to salvage a failed historical date. One is labeled a cult leader, the other is elevated as the spirit of prophecy. And what about the literary origin of her writings? In 1980, researcher Walter Rea published The White Lie, documenting that Ellen White borrowed up to 80 to 90% of her material in major books like The Desire of Ages from prior 19th century historical and devotional writers, such as William Hanna's The Life of Christ. The General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists commissioned a legal study, which concluded she was not guilty of copyright infringement under 19th century standards. But this legal defense misses the ethical point. She repeatedly claimed her words were given to her directly in visions from God, not copied from the uninspired books on her bookshelf. Is there a logical, natural explanation for her visions and her compulsive writing? At age 9, Ellen was struck in the face by a stone, fracturing her nose and leaving her unconscious for 3 weeks. Medical and historical researchers have hypothesized that this severe head trauma caused localized damage to her brain's temporal lobe, leading to complex partial seizures, also known as temporal lobe epilepsy. This specific neurological condition is scientifically documented to cause hypergraphia, an intense, compulsive drive to write, as well as vivid, multisensory religious hallucinations and intense feelings of cosmic ecstasy. What is more likely? That God chose a prophet whose theology contradicts the New Testament, whose prophecies failed, and whose visions had to be edited to cover up mistakes. Or that a severely injured young girl suffered from a well-documented neurological condition that simulated divine visions. To my Seventh-day Adventist viewers, I challenge you to be honest with yourself. If you saw these exact same historical facts, these exact same textual deletions, these exact same failed predictions, and these exact same plagiarized writings in any other church leader, whether it's Joseph Smith or Felix Manalo, you would not hesitate for a second to call them a false prophet. Why does Ellen White get a free pass? Why have you put her on a pedestal where the rules of biblical evidence no longer apply? True biblical faith does not fear honest investigation. If your belief in Ellen White requires you to keep a double standard, then it's time to weigh her on the scales of the Bible and let the truth speak for itself. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to see part 2, where we expose her dietary contradictions and health reform myths, make sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next video.